Hey, juniors, what's up? So the final, probably the most important event that causes the Civil War to happen when it does is a law, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is going to try to allow slavery to exist in the territory of Kansas, which was north of the 3630 parallel, above the line established by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Okay. This event is going to be the final thing that brings a collapse to the Whig Party. It's going to make all the Northern Democrats either leave the party or be not returned to office, and it's going to give rise to the Republican Party, a anti-slavery party, explicitly anti-slavery party, and a Northern party. And the Democrat Party will become the party of the slave-owning interest and of the South, okay? I mean, it already was, but in a more intensive way. It will absorb all of the former Southern Whigs, the rich plantation owners who had formerly allied themselves to the Whig Party in the 1830s and 40s. Okay, so how did this happen? All right, the 1852 was the final election in which a Whig candidate will run for president. And the Whigs are divided, as we know, between the Southerners, the rich slave-owning people, and the Northern Whigs, who tend to be more anti-slavery. Okay, we've talked about that a lot. Okay, and honestly, I need a nap, and I can't review that with you right now, but I hope you remember that. Okay, and also, so Fillmore was the president, and he was from New York, Millard Fillmore, but he had taken over for Zachary Taylor after Zachary Taylor died from eating too many grapes or something. And so then Fillmore had come in, and Fillmore had said, look, I'm a Northerner, but I support the Southern slave people. Okay. Not the slaves, but the slave-owning people, the bad side. Okay. And so Fillmore then says, I want to get reelected in 1852. And the Northern Whigs say, no, we don't want you. And his own state, the guy William Seward, who was one of the leading anti-slavery Whigs, and we talked about him because he had a great speech against the Missouri Compromise, or the 1850 Compromise, making the moral case against slavery. So he is putting forward Winfield Scott, who was a general from the Mexican-American War, which the anti-slavery people had opposed, but he's kind of seen to be a compromise figure because even though he's Southern, he doesn't own slaves, and whatever. So so the Southern Whigs would reject this. Why? Because the last time they voted for a Southerner who was a war hero from the Mexican-American War, they had gotten Zachary Taylor, who turned out to be a free soiler. So they're thinking Winfield Scott is a free soiler and disguised as a moderate, which is the only reason that William Seward would support him. And so the Southern Whigs leave the party en masse and do not vote for Winfield Scott. And so the result is that the Democrats win the election in a landslide. And their candidate was a guy named Franklin Pierce, who was a Northerner, also a Mexican War veteran. But he was somebody who was not he was silent on slavery. He was not an abolitionist, certainly, but he was also not an anti-slavery guy. And so he's favorable to the South. Basically, he was going to be hands-off. He wants the federal government to be hands-off with regard to slavery, and which is what Southerners want, except in the case of the Fugitive Slave Act, where they want the federal government to come in and capture the slaves and send them back to the South. Okay. Now, right away, Pierce proves that he is going to comply with this, that he is, in fact, not a hands-off guy with regard to slavery. He is going to enforce the anti-slavery, he is going to enforce the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, which we talked about a lot on Friday. And there was another big confrontation in Boston. Another guy got up to Boston, Anthony Burns, and he wrote a letter to his brother, who was a slave, and the owner found it, and the owner goes up to Boston to claim him, and they put him in the courthouse, and a anti-slavery militia forms, another militia led by a minister, another Unitarian minister, not the one we talked about last time, but a different one, and they're outside the courthouse. But then Franklin Pierce sends in Marines and other people, and they shut it down, and they take into custody Burns, and they march him through the streets, these federal troops, back to the wharf and into slavery. And the Bostonians are demonstrating against this. They're lined up in the streets. They've draped black funerary drape cloth all over their homes. They've hung the American flag upside down. Da 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 da. The people who had been organizing the militia to defend Burns and prevent him from being sent back into slavery are indicted in a federal court. The charges are later dropped. But this prompts William Lloyd Garrison, who is in charge of that anti-slavery newspaper, abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, and he's the kind of the head of the abolition movement nationwide. That is the movement to end slavery now, not to adopt this gradualist thing. William Lloyd Garrison burns the U.S. Constitution. Okay? Whoa, I dropped the pen. Okay, so he's saying, look, the whole Constitution, we have to get rid of it and start over again, is Garrison's whole thing. Okay, that's not a universal within the abolition movement. Frederick Douglass, for instance, says, no, the Constitution as it is the best defense that a black man has to be free and to have equality. But anyway, so abolitionists are divided on supporting the Constitution or not. But Garrison has come out against it now. Okay, well, so look, this is going on. And so what happens now is that the northern states start to, in defiance of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, pass personal liberty laws, again, which they're not supposed to do, right, that give as enslaved persons the right to testify in court on their own behalf and so forth, and then have a trial by jury and so forth. Okay, so all of this is happening, and sort of the most famous example of of conflict here in this regard is Margaret Garner, who's an escaped slave who is caught and taken back into slavery, but horrifically kills one of her children and tries to kill the other ones to prevent them from going back into slavery. And this is highly publicized and whatever, used by both sides to promote their cause. But this is again this intensification of the conflict here. And so Pierce has identified himself as a Democrat who's going to enforce this fugitive slave law. Okay, but then in the middle of all of this, in 1854, comes the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is going to be the definitive thing. So I'm going to talk about that in the next bit of lecture.